And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment of Cowboy State Politics Live. From very high above all the puerile and bombastic twits in the Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan. No. I'm so used to saying that, I forget. And maybe it's my aversion to the Middle Swamp, but that's where I'm at. I'm down in Cheyenne at the Middle Swamp during the 2025 legislative session. It's shaping up to be an interesting one, is about all I can say. The Republicans or the conservatives in the House have rolled out their 5 and dime plan and assigned all of those to committee. And it's a different feeling than in years past. And the reason I say that is there's a lot of excitement in the air because things are new. And I've done a lot of research, and I don't think that conservatives have ever been in power in the Wyoming legislature. Oh, sure, Republicans have been in power for a really long time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're conservative. And this is a fight that we've been having in Wyoming for a very long time. There's only one thing better than owning one party, says the Democrat. The only thing better is owning both parties. And that's the situation that we've been in for, I would say a really long time. But not so anymore. Conservatives are in charge, and it's very, very clear. Bills that had a hard time passing in the previous legislative sessions are sailing right through. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be opposition to them, and there doesn't mean that there hasn't been opposition to them already. We saw some of that in committee yesterday, and I'm going to get to that during the course of the broadcast. But the big question is what's going to happen in the Senate. If the opening day events are any indication that, and what I'm referring to is Larry Hicks's objection to Eric Barlow being the chairman of Health and Labor. If that's any indication of how things are going to go, conservative bills might have a bit of a problem in the Wyoming Senate. Now, I know that there's other pundits who are saying, Bo Whiteman and Tim Salazar, they're really conservative, and so they'll be able to work together. Well, I don't know. I don't think that a leopard can change its spots any more than a zebra can change its stripes, or that a redcoat can become conservative. I think that some of the more ambitious bills coming out of the House of Representatives are going to meet significant resistance in the Wyoming Senate. But all of that, remains to be seen. We really don't know. And anything right now is just kind of a projection. It's theorizing, it's predictions, and they're worth about as much as the penny that you find on the ground outside. So anyway, we just got to wait and see what's going to happen in the Wyoming Senate. As far as the House goes, I've got a couple of interesting bills that were passed out of committee yesterday, the What is a Woman Act and the anti-DEI bill. Those are fascinating. Also on today's broadcast, I want to talk about the drug court. Now, this is something that Governor Gordon and Supreme Court Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Kate Fox, have been working on for a long time. Well, that thing was pretty much killed in committee yesterday, but I want to talk about it because I think that it's a a thorny issue for conservatives. I myself am a little undecided on it. There's a lot of factors at play. So we're going to talk about that during the course of the broadcast. Also, I'll be able to take your calls today. I got that whole thing figured out. I mean, there's always new challenges when you move to a new studio. If you're watching the Ditto cam, you can see behind me that there's very little hanging on the wall, so I got to figure out something to do there. And also, there's some technical challenges, but I got a lot of those figured out last night and early this morning, and so I'll be able to take your calls. And if you want to be part of the program, the phone number is here in the mobile studio is the same one as always. It's 307-374-8989 if you want to be part of the broadcast. 307-374-8989. The Wyoming legislature is in full swing, and I'm sure that you have a lot of questions, and if you do, shoot them my way, and we'll talk about them. Normally, during the week, you kind of have to talk about what I want to, but in this case, this is all kind of new for us, so whatever you want to talk about, go ahead and give me a call, and we'll discuss it. But we begin this morning with a piece of good news from Breitbart, an article entitled, "The Number of Firearms in Civilian Possession Tops 490 Million." This is a good news for Americans and for the Second Amendment. It means that Americans are taking advantage of owning firearms and that they'll be able to personally resist tyranny should we get to that point. And make no mistake, the Second Amendment is not about hunting. It's not about shooting sporting clays. It's not about having fun. It's about preventing tyranny. That's the reason why the Second Amendment was written. Now, that's not to say that hunters shouldn't be about the Second Amendment, because certainly their sport, it requires the Second Amendment. But the Second Amendment doesn't have anything to do with hunting, if that makes any sense whatsoever. From Breitbart, and I quote, "A report from the National Sports Shooting Foundation shows that the number of firearms in civilian possession topped 490 million in 2022. So this is an old report, which means that the number has gone up dramatically during the Biden administration. Before Biden came around, there was only one person who held the title of greatest gun salesman in the history of the country, and that was Barack Obama. Until, of course, Joe Biden came around. And, gun sales have skyrocketed under Joe Biden simply because American citizens have no idea, or still have no idea, what Biden was up to and what a perfect time to buy a firearm. According to the NSSF, quote, "The estimated total number of firearms in civilian possession from 1990 to 2022 is 491 million firearms. Moreover, the NSSF pointed out that more than 10 million firearms were domestically produced in 2022 alone. The domestically produced firearms, combined with those that were imported, resulted in 16 million total firearms that were made available to the U.S. market in 2022. Handguns, of course, dominate the firearms available in the U.S. market. For example, of the 16 million firearms that were available in 2022, 9.8 million were handguns, 4.19 million were rifles, and 2 million were shotguns. Handgun availability and production correlates with the concealed carry self-defense market in the United States. All 50 states have permitted concealed carry, and 29 of those states have constitutional carry, including the state of Wyoming, which allows law-abiding citizens to forgo a permit and still carry a handgun daily for self-defense. As I was walking into the Wyoming Capitol on Monday, I was kind of shocked. I was elated. I was surprised. I was excited not to see the stupid sign that was almost always present in front of the front door that says firearms not permitted in the Wyoming Capitol. And then I turned around and there's a sticker on the door. So firearms are still not permitted in the Capitol, even though the governor and the whatever board they serve on, the building commission, that's what it is, said that, well, we're reworking the rules and pretty soon you'll be able to carry your firearm in common areas in the Capitol. But you can't carry it in the House chamber. You can't carry it in the gallery. You can't carry it in the Senate chamber. You can't carry it in the Senate gallery. But you can carry it in the Capitol extension, but just not in any of the committee rooms, which means basically that if you want to carry your firearm in the Capitol building, you can hang out in the lobby, but you can't really do anything else. What a stupid rule coming from a stupid governor. The only thing he's trying to do is placate gun owners. But the thing is, in Wyoming, we firearms aficionados are way smarter than the good governor or his building commission. I spoke with Secretary of State Chuck Gray yesterday, and we didn't broach this subject, but he did tell me that he's working on expanding a lot of the things that conservatives care about, one of which is firearms in the Capitol. There are many states that allow open carry in their Capitol building, which, by the way, there isn't an exception in the Second Amendment that says, except in the Capitol building, except in schools. It doesn't say that at all. It says, shall not be infringed. So not only are all of these restrictions absolutely unconstitutional, they're dumb, because the constituency with the lowest crime rate over any other is concealed carry owners. The crime rate is even lower than that of police. So it's absolutely stupid, and the governor is stupid for thinking that this is going to placate gun owners. It's not. It's only going to inflame them. But there is good news in that more firearms are being sold, and the number is growing every day. Now we begin we already began with the gun thing, but as far as Wyoming news goes, let's go to the cow pie. An article entitled "Freshman Lawmakers Vote Down Program for Offenders with Mental Illness." Now, this is a big problem in Wyoming. There's been a rise in drug use with the increased availability of fentanyl in every Wyoming community, and every town has a drug problem. That's not news at all. And I think that since the very beginning, communities have had drug problems, whether it's pot or cocaine or heroin or whatever. That's just one of those things that you're always going to have. But I think that we're seeing, and I'm in talking with a number of people who are, I want to say, pretty attuned to this area. They told me that there is an increase in mental illness in a lot of Wyoming communities. To the article, and I quote, 5 freshman legislators from the Wyoming House Judiciary Committee voted down a bill Wednesday that would have given courts the option to send people who commit minor crimes into mental health treatment before they're convicted. House Bill 49 stands a much slimmer chance of being entertained by the Wyoming House of Representatives and passed into law, with 5 members of the committee voting to kill it and 4 voting members to pass it to the floor. Detractors worried that the bill would grow government and invite exploitation of the justice system. Proponents urged its passage to get mental illness sufferers help early rather than clogging up the jails with them. Now, this is a pretty complicated issue. First, it is not the role of government to be meddling in healthcare. We've had this debate for a really long time since, Barack Obama came along with Obamacare. It is not the role of government to meddle in your healthcare. That's the responsibility of the individual. With rights come responsibilities, and if you want to have rights, you're going to have to take responsibility for yourself. And your family's going to have to do it. But therein lies the question. There are a lot of people that suffer from mental illness that don't have any contact with their families. I read a story, or I heard a story yesterday from a representative in Gillette, and they had a case where there was a naked man running around a parking lot outside of a restaurant. And this guy had been arrested numerous times. And, all the kids in the restaurant were looking out the window, staring at the naked guy running around the parking lot. And so the cops would come and arrest him and haul him off to jail. Well, you can't hold him indefinitely. It doesn't matter if you have mental problems or not, you still have rights. And so they would release the guy. And then he would go do the same thing. The question is then, what do we do with that individual? Well, obviously, he has mental health problems. Don't really know why, whether it might be a result of drug use or maybe he's not getting the medication that he needs. But regardless, it's a problem. And the question is, what do you do with it? Well, one solution is to lock him up and throw him in jail. But that creates a problem for police officers and jail personnel. That same person who was telling me his story about the naked man said that when some of these individuals get to jail, they have such mental problems that it's dangerous for even the jailers to enter the cells. Not to mention it's kind of dirty. A lot of people with mental illness, they do some pretty disgusting stuff in their jail cells. So the staff at the jail, they are the ones that have to deal with that. So, it is a big question all around. Now, the bill proposed to expand the state's Court Supervised Treatment Program Act, or drug court, to include a diversion court provision, which would be optional. It would have authorized the court to offer mental health treatment programs for people who have been charged with minor crimes. Alyssa Butler, Wyoming State Courts Administrator, told the committee during the Wednesday meeting. A pilot version of the program started out in Campbell County, and it graduated, and listen to this, one person last year. 12 people were referred to it, 6 were screened for it, and 2 were accepted into the program as of August. Butler indicated that 2 more were admitted to it after that point. One of the inductees didn't graduate because he or she needed a more acute level of care than the program could give, said Butler. Now, there's another option here. We have a state mental hospital in Evanston, and the question is, why can't we ship these people over there and get them the mental health treatment that they require? Well, the problem is the state hospital doesn't have the beds to accommodate as many people who have mental illness in the state. So what are you going to do? Obviously, there has to be some sort of treatment. I would say a good first step, and a conservative one, is to try to get a handle on the drug problem. And now we know we're never going to eliminate drugs. I think that's been proven to be kind of an impossibility. But at the very least, if the increase in mental illness can be traced back to the increase in drug availability, then if we get a handle on the drug problem, we ought to be able to get a handle on the mental health problem as well. But secondarily, Wyoming already spends a tremendous amount of money on the mental health industry. I don't know exactly what the figure is, but it's a huge amount. So and certainly we already have resources available with the amount of money that we're spending on mental health in this state. And during the last couple of sessions, it seemed like every other word that came out of the liberals' mouths was, we need more money for mental health. Mental health in schools, mental health in community, and there has to be money there. Now, do I know what the question or the answer is on this one? Nope, except to say that with rights come responsibilities, and it is up to families to take care of these individuals. But the other answer, I think, is not this drug court, which obviously only graduated one person, and there's an increased problem. So anyway, I think this is an open question. I would love to hear your input on it, on how we handle the increase in mental illness in just about every Wyoming community, because this one's going to require more study, and I'm not afraid to admit that I don't really have the answer to this one. So if you got an idea about it, go ahead and give me a call, 307-374-8989. We'll continue after the break. Christmas is over, and all of the fun holiday cheer has been had, and what are we all left with? Frigid Wyoming weather. Below freezing temperatures that you still have to go out in. That's right, you do have to go back to work at one point or another. And not to scare you, but think about this. Every single morning, you get to scrape the ice off of your windshield. Now, while I can't do anything with that, I can make sure that your feet stay nice and toasty warm while you're doing it. All you have to do is order a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. And to get you a pair of them, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, on the Independence Network. I'm almost omnipresent. Welcome back, my friends. David Iverson, doing what I was born to do each and every day with talent given to me by God Himself. Before the break, I was telling you that there's a number of bills that have been passed out of committees in the Wyoming legislature. Another one of those is a bill we heard last year that was crushed by the Redcoats. Not because it wasn't a good idea, but because it was politically inconvenient for them. Because the Redcoats counted on constituencies from the liberal wing of Wyoming voters. But not so this time from the Cowboy in an article entitled House Committee Passes Wyoming's What is a Woman Act After Confrontational Testimony. Now, I'm going to play a couple sound bites for you here in just a second. But the question of what is confrontational is interesting. Now, the headline clearly leads you to believe that the committee meeting was a knockdown dragout. But none of that is really true. There was one person who provided testimony to the committee that took a shot at Wyoming equality. A well-deserved shot, by the way. An interesting thing about it, and I'm going to try to get an interview with this guy. His name is Dr. Guggenheim, and he's with an organization called Gays Against Groomers. And it's his testimony is interesting, to say the least. And like I said, I'm going to play a couple sound bites out of it. But first to the article, and I quote, Wyoming's that's the introduction. Quote, a bill telling Wyoming's government and courts to treat males and females according to their biological sex rather than their gender identity has cleared its first committee hearing and now advances to the State House of Representatives. The What is a Woman Act, or House Bill 32, seeks to define terms like woman, man, girl, boy, mother, father, according to a person's biological sex, rather than the gender identity across Wyoming's governmental systems. Now, let's just stop right there for a second. Some definitions are in order, or the lack thereof. What is a gender identity? Well, I don't think that that's really a thing. Rather, I think we can boil that down to a person's choice. How they like to dress, how they like to portray themselves, how they like to carry themselves, what shoes they like to wear, and what makeup or whatever. But it's really not a thing. The only gender that a person has is whether they're a man or a woman. This whole idea of a gender identity is an artificial construct. It is something that has been created by people to be able to do whatever it is that they want to do and have rights associated with it. The truth is, the only rights you do have are given to you by God, and they're listed in the Constitution. We don't get to create rights out of whole cloth. But this gender identity is an attempt to create another subcategory of constituency and ascribe rights to them. The truth is, everybody already has the same rights, and those arguing for, gender neutral bathrooms or whatever, it's only an attempt to gain more privileges from a system in which they already have the same privileges. The Wyoming Constitution clearly says that all people are equal. It doesn't put any distinction on it, whether you're a man, you're a woman, you're black, you're white, you're a Hispanic, you're Native American, there are no distinctions in it whatsoever. Each member of the human race is equal, period. And there are only two sexes. I don't care how confused you want to make the situation. Every biology textbook on the planet, except those written by radical leftists, that really wouldn't be a biology textbook anyway. But there's only two sexes. And in law, we should only recognize two sexes. Now, there's been a concerted effort by the LGBTQZXPWDS lobby to create more constituencies and thereby get special rights and special privileges over and above those already identified in the Constitution. Now, a lot of people say that rights are granted by the Constitution. That's not true at all. It's a list of rights. Rights are given to you by God, and they're just recognized in the Constitution. Back to the article. The What is a Woman Act, or House Bill 32, let's see here, I already read that. It also urges courts to judge state laws separating the sexes under a more favorable standard than they would laws that implicate a constitutional right. The House Judiciary Committee advanced the bill Wednesday to the House floor on a vote of 7 lawmakers in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 excused. The committee's lone Democrat, Mike Yin of Jackson, voiced the lone nay vote. Opponents said the bill is overbroad, inconsiderate, and technically impossible to enforce. Well, first of all, the intent of the bill is to provide definitions in Wyoming law of what a man is and what a woman is. That seems to be pretty clear. And interestingly enough, we already have statutes that are kind of like this, though they're in sort of a place that you wouldn't expect. They're in the hunting and fishing regulations. Think about it, right? You have a cow elk tag and you have a bull elk tag. That is, you have a male elk tag or a female one. And so we already have distinctions of male and female in Wyoming law. This one just happens to relate to people. And this is how ridiculous of a place we're in. We shouldn't have to define what a man and a woman is. Every single person that is walking the face of the planet has a mother. They were born. Every single person on the face of the planet has a father or someone who fathered them. I'm not saying, and I would say that we ought to provide a definition of the difference between a dad and a father and you know what I'm getting at. But the point here is that everybody knows what the difference between a man and a woman is. But the reason why this definition is trying to be so confused by the radical left in Wyoming is so that you can be whatever you say you are. To create a situation of relativistic morals and relativistic truth. Because if you can convince people that a man can become a woman or a woman can become a man, then you can convince them of anything. It really does go straight to the agenda of the radical left that we have to confuse definitions. And if you can do that, you can convince people of just about anything. So let's get to some of the testimony here, because I think this Dr. Guggenheim brings up some interesting points. So here's the first one that I selected for you. Take a listen to this.
Committee members, my name is Dr. Rich Guggenheim. I'm the Director of Legislation for an organization called Gays Against Groomers. We are an organization of LGBT and T people who oppose the indoctrination, sexualization, and medicalization of children under the guise of LGBTIQA+. I am here today to ask you to vote yes on HB 0032 and send this to the floor. What is a Woman's Act? Wyoming is hallowed ground for the fight for women's right. It was here in this very building where the 19th Amendment was ratified and women were given the right to vote. It was also in this building that the first female US governor took office. The transgender agenda is fundamentally homophobic, misogynist, and harmful to the freedom and liberties of all of us. Gender ideology and queer theory seeks to compel our speech and strip women of their right to consent and say no to men in their bathrooms, locker rooms, on their fields and courts, and in their prisons. It strips women of their right to privacy and safety and deprives them of hard-earned opportunities in sports, the academy, sciences, and economically.
Now, there's a number of interesting points in there. One of the ones I find fascinating is that the push for this LGBTQZXPWDS agenda is that it is homophobic. Interesting that he separates the rights that were fought for by gay and lesbian Americans, and he includes transsexuals, to say that the LGBTQ agenda is homophobic. But again, I don't agree with this one simply because every member of the human race is equal. Nobody has special rights. Nobody deserves special rights. We all have the same amount of them. And whatever you want to do, whatever you want to call yourself, however you want to dress, fits into that category of rights. Secondly, and I find this one interesting too, that Dr. Guggenheim says that the LGBTQ agenda is misogynist in nature. And I think this one is more accurate simply because how many times on, various internet shows, various news shows, have you heard somebody ask another person, what is a woman? And they're unable to answer the question. Of course, probably the most high profile of that one was Ketanji Brown Jackson during her confirmation hearing when she was asked by a member of the committee to define what a woman is, and she refused to do so. And what is happening to women, and there are instances of this in Wyoming, is that we are reducing what it means to be a woman to merely an idea. This is dangerous simply because you can contort an idea to be anything that you want. In Wyoming, the right for women's equality, though it began a really long time ago, and Dr. Guggenheim brings up a couple of those, that we were the first state to give women the right to vote, that we had the first woman governor. And also, there was a protracted fight to get women to have an equal amount of sports in high schools. Now, that one in particular was hard fought and hard won. And now we do have athletic parity in Wyoming schools. But if you can reduce what it means to be a woman to an idea, that means that you can contort all of the rights that are ascribed to being a woman to an idea also. And you can turn them into privileges for everybody. In a lot of news broadcasts, we've heard of men joining women's sports teams. At the University of Wyoming, we had a man join a sorority, and as far as I know, he's still a member of that sorority. Last I heard, it was still tied up in court. But there are spaces that are created specifically for women and specifically for men, for that matter, and they ought to continue that way. If we are able to reduce what it means to be a woman to an idea instead of a biological reality, then we can erase whatever rights are ascribed to that gender, the right to vote or whatever. It's an interesting idea that the LGBTQ agenda is at its very core misogynist. And I don't think that I've ever heard it described that way, but it's interesting. Now I'm going to try to track down this Dr. Guggenheim today and see if I can get an interview with him. Oh, and while I'm on the subject, I've got a couple of interviews that are scheduled. Today at noon, I'm going to interview United States Representative Harriet Hageman. This has kind of become a tradition on Cowboy State Politics that we get a hold of our congresswoman right at the beginning of the legislative session. And so I'm going to do that today at noon, and I'll probably publish that interview on Saturday's edition of Weekend Update. Also, and this one isn't set in stone, but I'm going to try really hard this morning to track down former Senator Rick Santorum. And he's a big proponent of the Convention of States. And I had a couple of friends reach out to him last night, and he did agree to an interview on Cowboy State Politics. It's just there's a timing issue. So right after I finish the program, I'm going to hustle over to the Capitol building and see if I can corner him for an interview. That should be, if I'm able to make it happen, a really interesting conversation. But I digress. So let's get back to what the rest of what Dr. Guggenheim said. And this next piece, he explains why the LGBTQ agenda is homophobic. And I find this one interesting too. Take a listen.
This ideology and agenda are also fundamentally homophobic. Gays and lesbians fought hard for the basic freedoms and liberties to serve our nation in the military, to be secure in housing and unemployment, and to share the legal protections of marriage. And we won those rights. Our rights as gay and lesbians are predicated upon the same rights of women because our rights are sex-based.
Very, very interesting argument. I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, except to say that everyone has the same rights, that it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or black or white or what have you. Everybody, every member of the human race is equal, period. And I understand where Dr. Guggenheim is coming from, but I think it's problematic when you try to separate rights based on particular characteristics of an individual. Well, I have certain rights because, I'm straight, or you have certain rights because you're gay. No, you don't have those rights because of your sexual preference. You have those rights by virtue of being a human being because they're given to you by God. And I think that any step towards creating specific rights for specific constituencies is problematic in that you are, in effect, picking winners and losers. At some point down the line, you're going to hear the argument that, well, this group deserves this right as opposed to, I mean, you're further dividing people. It's reductionist in nature. You're trying to reduce what it is to be a human being. What the Wyoming Constitution mentions that all people are members of the human race are equal. But when you engage in this reductionism, that rights are granted based on immutable characteristics, like if you're a man or a woman, I think that reduces what it means to be a human being. Truth is, everybody has the same amount of rights, and we ought not deviate from that. Now, the article goes on and on and on, but the truth is, this one deserves a debate on the floor. It was killed last year unceremoniously by the Redcoats. But there's another interesting bill that's been happening, and it comes from one of the usual Redcoats, perhaps one of the biggest Redcoats, to the Pravda on the Platte. In this morning's paper, they have a list of bills that they're watching, and one of which is House Bill 100. Now, this one is... and I kind of jumped the gun a little bit. I'll tell you about the bill I was referring to in just a second. But House Bill 100, it has received a lot of press recently in that it would allow a school district to hire a teacher who does not possess a teaching certificate. First, from the Pravda on the Platte, and I quote, Representative Ocean Andrew of Laramie is hoping to pass a bill that would allow local school boards to adopt policies to hire individuals without a teaching certificate as administrators, teachers, or other personnel. The bill requires that the individual go through a criminal history background check and be over the age of 18. Andrews said the teacher shortages, which have been affecting school systems across the country, was not the only reason for bringing the bill. Quote, education today cannot afford to remain a one-size-fits-all system, Andrews said. While the traditional certification model is important and valuable, it may not always align with the specialized or differentiated skills needed in modern classrooms. He added that this bill could allow people with real-world experiences in areas like STEM, the arts, and trades to be able to teach the upcoming generations. Quote, this is not a blanket authorization to bypass certification, but an option for districts to create tailored policies that reflect their values and goals, Andrews said. Districts could implement rigorous hiring processes, ongoing performance evaluations, and professional development to ensure these educators perform effectively. And essentially what this bill does is reinforces local control. You hear school personnel all the time complain about the legislature passing laws that they have to follow. And our traditional model has been to allow individual school districts to run their school however they see fit. And the interesting part of it is in education, everybody screams about local control, except, of course, when there's an issue that local control won't address, in which case, then they ask the legislature to step in. But in this case, it's interesting because the bill says that the school district itself can develop its own policies by which to hire people that don't necessarily have teaching certificates. And let me give you a good example. A good friend of the program, my personal friend, Representative Ken Pendergraft, is a brilliant craftsman. He's a brilliant woodworker. The guy makes things that are absolutely beautiful. So don't tell me that he isn't qualified to teach a woodshop class. Now, maybe there's some question about, educational theory and getting through to students. But if somebody is a skilled teacher, whether they have a certificate or not, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't prevent them from teaching, especially if the school district itself can determine what the standards and policies are to be hired. Similarly, I know several engineers, and there's no reason why they couldn't teach math. I don't understand why the school system, well, I do understand why the school system doesn't take advantage of the talent that's in their local communities. It's a monopoly. Right now, you have to have a teaching certificate to be a teacher. And so only those people that have teaching certificates can be teachers. Now, let's say that you're a crappy teacher, but you do have a teaching certificate, and there's a guy down the road that he has all the requisite skills, and he's good with people, and he's great at training apprentices. This bill would appear as a threat. But I think that and while you might take it as such, it's not. One of the advantages of this bill that I don't think anybody has really brought up is that it forces competition. Iron sharpens iron. And if teachers with a teaching certificate have to compete against people who don't necessarily have a teaching certificate, it forces them to hone their craft. It forces them to be a better teacher, because if they're not, they might get replaced by somebody who doesn't have a teaching certificate. And I guess the last point I would make on this one is, just because you have a piece of paper doesn't mean that you're skilled in any particular area. I know a lot of people that have driver's licenses. They can't drive for crap. It doesn't mean that you're a good driver just because you have a driver's license. Similarly, it doesn't mean that you're a good teacher just because you have a teaching certificate. I mean, I think that's a specious argument. And if school districts are so dead set on local control, then they absolutely should be in favor of this bill. There shouldn't be any question about it. And this bill should sail right through. But what you are going to see is the Wyoming Education Association, the teachers union in Wyoming, be vehemently against this bill, because right now they have a corner on the market and they don't want to lose it. And I mean, it all boils down to money for those folks. That's why they're suing the state of Wyoming, saying that the state isn't funding education adequately, even though we spend more on education than just about every other state in the country. This is going to be a fascinating bill to watch. And I just hit the wrong button. Holy cow. I do that all the time. And one of the reasons for that is, on my board, I've got different screens, and I got to be on the right screen to push the right profit timeout break. Well, when we come back from the break, I'm going to tell you about a bill that Steve Harshman put forward. It's not a monument to America. It's a monument to Steve Harshman. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics live every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the Independence Network. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics. Cowboy State Politics is sponsored by FreedomGoldUSA.com. They are the working man's gold company. The economy is in turmoil. The stock market pretty much is out of control, and you never know what's going to happen with your finances or your income. One way that you can shore up everything is by investing in gold and silver. Go to freedomgoldusa.com/David for a free interview to discuss your options and find out if gold or silver is right for you. One more time, that's freedomgoldusa.com/David. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics, live on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, just about everywhere that you want to look. You can find Cowboy State Politics live, and the podcast, by the way. If you just go to Google and type in Wyoming politics or Cowboy State, yeah, it'll come up. Trust me. On the podcast, I've already got a number of stories up, and I'm going to continue through the legislative session. Nobody is going to cover the legislative session like Cowboy State Politics. And every day during Tuesday through Friday, we'll have Cowboy State Politics Live. And then every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, and maybe some in between, we'll have editions of the podcast. So there's going to be plenty of content coming from Cowboy State Politics, and I'm going to cover the legislature like nobody else will. Give you the inside track and the in-depth analysis that I always do. Now, one of the bills that is sponsored is coming from one of the famous redcoats, perhaps the original redcoat, Steve Harshman from Casper, former redcoat Speaker of the House. He wants what he's calling a monument to America. In reality, it's a monument to Steve Harshman from the Pravda on the Platte. This one's from the Pravda on the Platte, and it's a reprinted article from Wyopile. The bill would establish a task force to create a quote, monument to America, similar in size and scope to the 60-foot-high granite faces on Mount Rushmore. And I quote, a half a dozen state legislators want, and they're all redcoats, by the way, want to have its own Mount Rushmore. 6 sponsors have filed the bill 106, Monument to America, calling for $40,000 to establish a task force to recommend a monument by the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence by July 4th of 2026. The Monument to America would be similar in size and scope to Mount Rushmore, which has 60-foot-high faces of Presidents George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln carved into the granite cliffs. Wyoming's monument would feature historical figures from the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. Locating the sculpture on Wyoming School Trust land would generate income for state schools and other institutions, according to the bill. Representative Steve Harshman, the principal sponsor of the measure, this thing is laughable, my friends, said the idea is to draw tourists while simultaneously recognizing the 250 years of American history. Quote, I've been a history geek all my life, Harshman said. It was really 100 years ago, 1925, that South Dakota legislature gave approval to find a location for a monument that would honor our first 150 years. It's been incredibly successful, he said. 2.5 million visitors a year, $500 million in economic impact to the Black Hills. Well, the truth is, this isn't a monument to America. This is a monument to Steve Harshman. And he already has one, by the way. It's located at Natrona County High School in Casper. It's the $2 million walkway from the locker room to the football field. Steve Harshman is only interested in creating a legacy for himself, as he always is. And this is a bill for him to just say, look at how patriotic I am. It is a complete diversion, and it is going to be an extraordinary waste of money. The original Mount Rushmore came at a cost of $989,000 in like 1923, 1925, 1927, that's what it was. And in today's money, the inflation calculator, and I don't believe this for a minute, but anyway, in today's money, that would be $17.8 million to carve out some faces on the rock. I think that is an extraordinarily low estimate, considering the amount of money we spend on much smaller adventures. So take, for example, the shooting sports complex. That the legislature originally allocated about $10 million for it, but current estimates by current legislators say that that shooting sports complex is probably going to end up being around $15 million to build. And that's not carving anything out of rock. That's not employing a whole bunch of artists, and that's not doing it in under 2 years. It is absolutely ridiculous. It's going to cost several $100 million to do this. And secondarily, the only reason why Steve Harshman is pushing this bill is just to say, look at how patriotic I am. This is similar to the other bill that he sponsored. I don't quite have the bill number, but it's to prevent local municipalities from banning fireworks during the 4th of July. Again, it's another diversionary tactic. And with Steve Harshman and the rest of the redcoats, though they are fewer in number, it doesn't mean that their old tactics have gone away. You always have to watch what the other hand is doing, especially when it comes to Steve Harshman. Take, for example, last year's House Bill 203. That's the one where he wanted to eliminate property tax and replace it with sales tax. Now, I talked about this a lot on the podcast. And if you just read the bill, And if that's all it was, it sounds like a great idea. That we're going to replace property tax with a consumption tax. And there were a lot of Wyoming citizens who were absolutely fooled with that one. But that was not what Steve Harshman was up to. In other committee meetings, and I've yet to find the soundbite, but I will find it, Harshman talked about how much we tax services. In Wyoming, we only tax about 50 services. Other states, like Texas, they tax over 200 services. So really what Steve Harshman was up to was to increase the amount of sales tax, and I think it was going to be like 12% or something like that, and to increase the amount of services that we tax. So right now, for example, the lovely Christine doesn't have to charge tax when she gives somebody a new hairdo or does a color job. That service is not taxed. However, if she sells, a bottle of shampoo off the shelf, well, that is taxed. We don't tax groceries in the state of Wyoming, but we do tax sporting goods. So Steve Harshman's plan was to get this one through the door because it sounds great and it looks great, and just about everybody, a lot of people were, mistakenly in favor of it, and replace it with the tax on services. This is another example of that. Steve Harshman says we need to build a monument to America, which is really a monument to Steve Harshman. And it's a diversionary tactic to get everybody excited to mask what he's doing in other bills. And it's I can't stress enough how ridiculous this idea is. While I would love to have a giant statue of Woodrow, or not Woodrow Wilson, I hate that guy, of Calvin Coolidge, that I would even think of Woodrow Wilson and Calvin Coolidge in the same sentence is terrible. But while I would love to have Calvin Coolidge on the side of Iraq, or perhaps President Trump, or perhaps Ronald Reagan, I think that that's an extraordinary waste of money, and it is absolutely ridiculous. And it's just like everything that comes out of Steve Harshman's mouth, absolutely unneeded. Well, we've got about 9 minutes left in the program. Let's get to some national news while we're at it. From Breitbart News, the Democrats have exposed the mismanagement of the Pentagon during the Hegseth hearing. And this is an exclusive with Senator Ron Johnson, and I quote, Democrat senators exposed, quote, the mismanagement of the Pentagon during the Pete Hegseth hearing on Tuesday. Ron Johnson said in an appearance on Breitbart News Daily, quote, Democrats just appeared shrill to me, Johnson said of the Democrats' behavior during Tuesday's hearing. Quote, if anything, they were just exposing the mismanagement of the Pentagon during the Biden administration, demanding that, Pete have some magical management skills to fix it all. Quote, from my standpoint, Pete and President Trump have the right idea. Let's get woke out of the military. Let's focus on lethality, military readiness, qualification, and meritocracy, those types of things. That's what most Americans on our side of the aisle agree with. And I think that it'll be popular, Johnson said, noting that the military has not been hitting recruitment goals. He believes that is, in part, because of the woke initiatives in the military, which really took off under the Biden administration. People who are brave enough to serve and sacrifice put their life on the line to defend our freedoms. They don't want to enter the military and have it become a social experiment, which, by the way, the military has been engaging in social experimentation for a really long time. This is nothing new under Joe Biden. It happens under just about every Democrat president. Let's see here. During the Q&A of Tuesday's hearing, Senator Dan Sullivan asked Hegseth what the reaction would be from the troops once the woke nonsense was weeded out. Quote, if confirmed and you issued an order saying we are going to rip the Biden woke yoke off the neck of our military and focus on lethality and warfighting, how do you think the troops would react? He said, and Pete Hegseth responded, quote, Senator, I know the troops would rejoice. They will love it. They will love it, and we've already seen it in recruiting numbers. Hegseth added that the military will gladly follow the order because they want to focus on lethality and warfighting and get all of the woke political prerogative, politically correct, social justice, political stuff out of the military. The military is no place for a social experiment. It's no place for the woke agenda. The military has one job: to kill our enemies. That's their job, and we need to be the biggest, the baddest, and the most effective guy on the block. The point of the military is to fight and win wars, period, not to engage in social experimentation, not to put people who think they're a man when they're actually a woman on the front lines. All of that can be left to academia, and even so, I think those people need to be fired. And we have another piece of good news, my friends. It seems that some things are only worth as much as people will pay for them. And even so, after those items have been paid for, they're not really worth much of anything. And this is also kind of a sympathy card to Hunter Biden, because most of his artwork worth, quote, millions of dollars was destroyed in the LA fires. And again, something is only worth what somebody will pay for it. And some idiot wanted to launder money through buying one of Hunter Biden's pieces of art. And I quote from Breitbart News. A trove of nearly 200 artworks by Hunter Biden has been destroyed, one of the casualties of the wildfires ravaging Los Angeles, the Post has learned. The controversial art had been in storage near the Pacific Palisades home of Hunter's Hollywood attorney, Kevin Morris, and is valued at millions of dollars, a source close to the Biden family said. Morris, who loaned the first son nearly $5 million to help pay a bill and has been financing a documentary on him, lives in a sprawling 5-bedroom, 6-bathroom home, which is among the few houses still intact in the posh neighborhood, the New York Post can confirm. Morris could not be reached for comment, but last week, as the fires began to rage, President Biden said his son's home in nearby Malibu may still be intact. Today, it appears, it's still standing. We're not sure. A lawyer for Hunter Biden, who is a self-taught artist, quote unquote, who turned to painting while in recovery from drug addiction, did not immediately return a request for comment. The Soho gallerist, who represented the first son's artwork and who had organized solo shows for his paintings in Los Angeles and New York, said he broke ties with Hunter Biden last year. Quote, "I don't know what's happening with the art," said the gallery owner. "I have some of his work on canvas, some metal pieces at the gallery." Hunter's art pieces have been priced as high as $500,000 each. Morris bought $875,000 worth of Hunter's artwork via the gallery, many of them on flowers and on Japanese paper. So really, Hunter's art fiasco was nothing more than an attempt to launder more money to the Biden operation. When it was exposed that he was getting money from America's adversaries, he had to kind of put the brakes on that because Republicans in the House Oversight Committee were onto his trail. And so he turned to selling art. And really, it wasn't art that he was selling. It was still excess. But it had to appear legitimate. So Hunter Biden creates this piece of garbage and they sell it for $500,000, even though Hunter Biden has no art pedigree. But it might be one of those curiosities. A lot of times we see different possessions of celebrities that are sold for ridiculous amounts of money, but most of them have historical significance. So, for example, the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz, or Babe Ruth's uniform. That's an interesting story. Or the baseball signed by Mickey Mantle, or there's any number of sports memorabilia or movie memorabilia that sells for a tremendous amount of money. But that has historical significance tied to it. The only historical significance tied to Hunter Biden's work is government corruption. And it's I feel bad for old Hunter that all his artwork was destroyed, but really it wasn't worth anything to begin with. On tomorrow's edition of Cowboy State Politics Live, I'm hoping to have some sound bites from my interview with Harriet Hageman, to just sort of tantalize you into listening to the entire interview. Again, just to give you kind of a heads up of what's happening on the podcast. Well, it's on Saturday's edition of the podcast. I'm going to have that interview with United States Representative Harriet Hageman. Hopefully, I'll get to interview former Senator Rick Santorum. We'll see how that goes. We'll have a debate about the Convention of States and lots more. There's a ton to come on Cowboy State Politics Live. I'm going to cover the legislature like nobody else will, with analysis and interviews that only I can bring you. So keep it tuned to the Cowboy State Politics. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns, from the depths of the Middle Swamp in Wyoming's capital of Cheyenne, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. Have a good day, man.